Hello, guys and girls. The program you are about to hear will be both fun and educational, but it is not a substitute for medical advice. Although we are doctors, we are not your doctors. Hello and welcome to Travel Medicine. As always, I'm your friendly neighborhood internal medicine doc, Dr. J.
Hey guys, coming to you from my beautiful lab space. This is Dr. Santhosh, your pediatric infectious disease doctor and researcher.
And it's Dr. Ward here, your ER MacGyver with a velvet voice and velvet hands.
And this is Dr. Praz, the Sandman, slipping you my IV roofies through the radio waves.
But in a totally legal and consensual way.
Exactly. Very different from IV roofies. But out there.
So, in a wonderful coincidence, we actually have the whole crew together tonight. I can't even remember the last time this happened.
Yeah.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
We have an exciting show this week. Exciting because we're interviewing somebody from a specialty that up until a few weeks ago I didn't even know existed.
Very rare for the Josh to not know.
And even more, perhaps a little embarrassing for me, is that you guys know among my many interests and hobbies, of course, is a deep interest in palliative care, quality of life, hospice, end of life type situations. And what we are going to be talking about today is a lot of palliative and specifically death doulaing. Not fighting like Alexander Hamilton, but the actual doula itself. So before we go too far off topic, and I promise you, listeners, we absolutely will, let's get around to introducing the very first and only death doula I have ever had the pleasure of meeting, Jasmin Tomlins.
Yay!
Hello.
Hi, Jasmin.
Hello.
It's good to be here. I forgive you for not knowing about me, because there are probably like 300, 400, maybe death doulas in the country.
Let's talk a little bit about this. Of course, I can't let a single episode go by without going into a little bit of history, and I get to talk about, well, I think you all know where this is going. Back to Victorian era.
Woohoo!
Now, the way we've handled death in this country has changed numerous times over the years. And while traditionally most of us think of death as being in a hospital, or maybe just those of us who work in the medical field are used to people dying in hospitals with tubes and lines looking like they belong in the Matrix. In fact, back in the Victorian era, it was very common to keep a dead body around for a while as part of the grieving process. Children used to help their families prepare the body for funerals. And in fact, in Victorian times, they would do photographs of the whole family with the dead person dressed and sitting, propped up to look like it was a regular family portrait. So these, the only time you would have a family picture, it would be very rare for everyone in the portrait to be alive. But damned if that was going to make them turn around. Like, we got the whole family together, we're doing this.
Yeah.
Kind of like how we record this podcast.
Absolutely.
Which one of you is dead right now?
I feel like I'm a little under the weather, but like I'm okay.
I'm not quite ready for Jasmine's services yet. Knock on wood.
We really didn't start moving death from the home to the hospital until mid-1800s, around the time of the Civil War. And that's when really the concept of modern embalming started. And that was mostly to help preserve the body, solely to bring soldiers back intact so their families could grieve. Before that, it was all home funerals. Now, when somebody dies, you generally put them in a coffin and bury them right away. But in this mid-period, when we were transitioning to the embalming practice, people used to they put bodies on ice, and they would ship them to preserve them back. Later, they started injecting them with chemicals. One of the most popular initial preservatives, and we could talk about embalming in an upcoming mini-sode, was arsenic, which worked out really, really well to preserve, but it also made forensics very difficult because it allowed you to poison people pretty much indiscriminately and then just say, no, 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 I didn't poison him with arsenic. He was already dead, and I was just trying to make sure the body stayed preserved to get back to the family member.
Huh.
And a little bit of this was the inspiration. That idea was kind of the inspiration behind the old comedy Arsenic and Old Lace.
Oh, nice.
So be careful of elderly ladies. They will sneak up on you when you least expect it. But now that I've gotten my obligatory Victorian and historical references out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what it is that a death doula actually does. So, Jasmin, what are you?
What are you, really?
What are you?
So, most people are familiar with the term doula as it pertains to birth. The word itself is Greek. It is a serving woman. So there are male doulas now. In fact, the person who first started talking about end-of-life doulas and this kind of care was a fellow, and that was in 2003. So it's very new as far as a profession. People started noticing that there were a lot of principles in the care of a mother who was giving birth that were useful for the dying. So a lot of comforting, a lot of sort of talking about the processes and lifting some of the veil up and letting people know what they can expect to happen, answer their questions, be there in the room with them, make sure that family members are being taken care of, just being sort of a comforting presence that has been there before so you don't have to be scared. So they were using a lot of these things and thought, okay, well, let's use these for the dying as well. And so death care started as far as doulas.
Some of the things you're mentioning, Jasmin, in both birth and the death experience, doctors and nurses we just do not have the training, the expertise, or time to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding that this role is sorely lacking in our healthcare system right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, doctors and nurses you're all excellent and everyone has their place, but you are like super busy. You have a lot of patients that you have to see. And the plus of having a doula, whether birth or death, is that that person is beholden only to you and will be there with you through that entire process. And, is not getting up to leave or, I can be there for the entire death process. I don't have any other demands on my time. My time is for the person who's dying.
There are a lot of settings in which a person can die, they could die in their home, they could die in an ICU, they could die in a hospice, they could die pretty much anywhere. Is there any particular setting that you cover, or you just sort of all branch out to all these different areas?
Pretty much any space. Yeah, no, anywhere someone's dying is a place that I'll go.
How do people usually end up contacting
That sounds like the worst superhero power ever. Someone about to die? On my way!
It's like the worst and the best, right? Because you go there and then you're there to comfort them.
Yeah.
But, there's also death all the time.
And also death.
I'm just picturing Superman, like, someone's in trouble, and he gets there right, he's like, I'm very sorry, and I wish you the best. On to the next person!
Yep, and I have x-ray vision also.
Nice.
That's not true.
That's not. Thanks for clarifying. By the way, that's not true. As if
I didn't want to lead anybody on.
No. I just love the idea of one of our listeners going, "I knew it."
I knew it. They're calling the feds right now.
Well, so, okay, Batman knows that there's trouble when there's a bat signal up in the clouds. How do you end up getting contacted?
What's your bat signal, Jasmin? Wow, I wish I had a bat signal. That would be very, very cool. But probably prohibitively expensive. Basically what happens is, so there are symptoms that, if you're with hospice, the hospice nurse will know what's going on as far as what symptoms to look out for. They'll let the families know, or I'll let the families know what symptoms you can expect to see during the active dying process. And when that starts happening, then it's time for them to give me a call, and then I will come and be there.
So are you usually contacted by a hospice nurse or hospice team member, or by families directly? How do people first learn about you?
So that's an interesting thing. I'm still just starting out, so I'm sort of building things. The way that people are getting in touch with me is either through the internet, mostly word of mouth, actually. When I started talking about what I was doing, I had friends who would contact me and they'd want to talk about their elderly relatives or their parents who were getting older and hadn't really started thinking about end of life, and they didn't know what to do and they didn't want to get caught off guard. Everybody has these questions, what am I going to do if my parent dies? I don't know what forms I need. I don't know any funeral homes in the area.
Wow.
I don't know any of these things. What if they die? This is terrifying. And it is terrifying. There's so much stuff that you need to know and no one talks about
Right.
it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you serve kind of almost as a life coach or a death coach?
Yeah, it's sort of like a life coach. I feel like saying, is saying death coach gauche? Like,
No,
can I say that?
no. So
That's pretty much exactly right. Sorry.
no, I don't think death coach is a bad thing to say at all. It's a little bit of, I shouldn't say an opposite, but almost like a complement to what I'm used to seeing in pediatrics, which is a birth doula. So this is the person, of course, who assists in, bringing someone into the world. And I think more than anything else in medicine as a philosophy, so any caretakers out there, we're really transitioning from this phase of going from this really paternalistic, like, this is the way we must regard, death kind of thing, into a more, this is just another transition. Birth is a transition, and we have to deal with it in one particular way. And life, life is also a transition. So,
On your definition, Santhosh, my mom would make a great doula because she's always telling me, I brought you into this
Take
world
you
and I
out.
can take you out of it.
See, yeah, there you go.
Personally, knowing your mom, she's a wonderful person. She's a dear friend. I believe her.
Not idle
Um,
friends. I take it.
Yes. No. So let's talk. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of training or certification do you have to take to become a doula? What's involved in this? And is death doula your preferred title, or what do people in your field prefer to be addressed as?
So there are actually a number of different segments of the field. I guess if you want to subspecialties, maybe. Some people don't like to say death because the culture, so they like to talk more about I'm an end of life doula. I divide it as my program divided it into sort of 5 separate sections. There's end of life doulas, and that's when you talk to people about all the advanced directives that they need to have, POLSTs, which are new to a lot of people. All of the
POLSTs, of course, for those of you at home, being what we call often advanced directives. What things would you want done in the exact moment? Would you want chest compressions? Would you want intubation? Would you want electric shocks? If you are resuscitated but otherwise unable to communicate, do you want tube feedings or life extending measures? Things like that. That's what's involved in what we call a POLST form.
Yeah, and there's so much that can be done these days with the science that we have. Just really heroic efforts that can be done. So you really sort of have to decide, well, do I want those things? Do I want all of those things? And under what circumstances do I want them? And so I talk to people about under what circumstances they want them. What does quality of life mean to you? All of those questions, so that they have a better idea and they're better informed as to how to fill out these advanced directives that talk about what care they want in the event that they are sick or they get injured or they're in the end-of-life process. So that's what the end-of-life doula is for. You can also talk to people about methods of disposition, if you want to be buried, if you want to be cremated and then shot into space. That's a thing.
Sure, absolutely.
How about thrown into a volcano?
You could be thrown into a
thrown
volcano.
into a
Just ask the
volcano.
people who own the volcano.
I mean, I like making sure that my local island gods are appeased every so often.
That's so important.
is.
Thank you for that.
You know, I have to say, like, based on what I've seen, like, I part of my background, in addition to doing anesthesia, some of our listeners know, I'm also a clinically trained intensivist, and so during my times in the ICU, I see a lot of end of life issues, and sort of like what you're saying, there's a lot of things that we can do with our science and with the technology that we have in medicine, and things like DNR, comfort care, hospice, they're really not as clear cut as most people think. There's a lot of gray areas, and when people don't explicitly write down what they do want or what they don't want, we're often left guessing or just going along with whatever their power of attorney or whatever family member is
And
there.
a lot of times, I think it's fair to say, Praz, that we end up with family members who maybe don't know what the end of care plan is supposed to be for a loved one because they've never discussed it, or they maybe don't know their loved one as dearly as they thought they did. So
Right.
that's a
And,
tough thing. And me dealing with pediatrics, it becomes even more extreme because all of a sudden this is a child. This is a little kid. It's no longer, you don't have the chance to think about, an older person or something like that. No. This is a teeny tiny life. And you don't ever expect for this person to die this quickly or
Right.
this abruptly.
Those are especially the things that people definitely don't want to prepare for, and I feel like no one should have to. In a perfect
No one
world,
would
no one
have
would
to,
have to
exactly.
prepare for them. But
Absolutely.
it's also the sort of thing where if you are prepared, or you do have some thoughts at least about what you'd like to do, it's going to be of exponential comfort during the process when you're actually going through all of the arrangements, because legally, of course, you have to eventually go through all of these arrangements. And so knowing what you're going to do, or having some idea of what your mother wanted, or even better, if we talked to her and we figured out exactly what she wanted, even down to what flowers she wants at the memorial, or what joyful remembrance actually means to her. Like, does she mean she wants people to laugh? Does it mean she just wants to talk about the good times? That sort of thing. The more instructions you can give, the less of a burden there is during the grieving process for the people that are left behind.
So you really get very detail oriented in the, I guess, the death part of the services, in all of them, but you plan things like death vigils.
Yes.
What are those?
So death vigils are part of the death doula part, which is after the end of life doula, and that is the actual active process of dying. We'll talk to people about what kind of music do they want. Do they want people doing readings? Do they want people singing or playing instruments? Would they like people to hold their hand? Who do they want around them? What family members do they want there? Do they want everyone in the room at the same time? Do they only want to be visited one at a time with people? Do they want their hair brushed? Would they like, their covers taken off and put back on again? And what degree of comfort do they want? And all of these things during the process, talking about what does their best death look like, and then how do we get as close to that as we can.
Interesting. And that's very, very different from how most people tend to die in a hospital, with a few exceptions of people who are on hospice floors or facilities. You definitely don't get mood music. At best, my phone might ring, and then you'll get the Gummy Bears theme. While
You need to change that theme.
it is getting a little awkward. I have patients bouncing here and there and everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a very different process dying in a hospital versus dying at home. And even after the death, usually I will come in and I'll pronounce a patient, and then I walk out, and it's very much Wizard of Oz. Everything happens behind the curtain, and I wave my wand, and things just take place, and that's it. So what about, let's say you've planned somebody's death vigil with them, you've talked about the kind of light and smells and sounds and touch and all these different senses you're sort of stimulating as they are transitioning to the next phase of whatever comes after this. What happens once that person's dead?
As you know, during birth, those things can go awry.
Wait, what?
So it's really all
No,
about
I'm kidding.
we can.
What?
They what?
I was ready for you to die, and this person stood up and came back to life. Great, zombies, just what I need.
Not that far awry.
Sorry, that was...
Yeah, that's
Okay.
crazy. We can talk about in the event of a zombie apocalypse afterwards. I just mean in the event that, they say they want this music, but that music becomes really irritating to them during the active death process. Or they said they wanted massage, but their skin is too
Sure, delicate.
sensitive
Absolutely.
to have massage. It's really important to be sort of quick on your feet and just be there for that person, whatever they need. If it goes off plan, you're just there for them. Let's do this however it's
So
going to
you're
happen.
usually there during the death vigil.
Yes. Yep, I'm there for the entire process.
Who else is there?
Whoever, the person who's dying, hopefully is there.
Right.
And then sometimes, I guess the hospice nurse, the family, whoever is able to make it. Sometimes I'm able, if there are families who are out of town, they can call me and I will go and be with their loved one in the hospital until they can get there.
So
Well,
you're
let me
on
just-
call.
I'm on call, yeah.
Wow.
Well, let me just say that from my experience, hate to be a bummer, but usually when someone dies in a hospital, that last moment, it's usually not a good experience for the nurses, docs, family members, and anyone else who's present. Do you have have you noticed what can make it into a better experience, if that's possible?
As far as the process, I feel like information is critical. Just making sure that everybody knows what happens, what's happening now, the symptoms as they come and go, just so no one starts, they hear the breath changing and all of that, and that can cause a lot of fear.
Sure.
Are you talking about the death rattle or the...
Yeah.
the-
And a lot of people will think that must hurt, they must be in pain, and so being able to explain that no, that's because there's congestion and it's okay, they're not in pain. Just being there as a stabilizing force can really help. Someone who's there for the family and who is there on call,
Sure.
I guess.
So, you're on call, which is kind of a very interesting concept as somebody who is forced to be on call, that you are in some ways also volunteering for, that you really are a death Batman.
Death Batman. I'm gonna put that on my resume.
Yeah, you're called.
Yes.
You're called. You're not always, except it's the reverse. You are both the death coach that someone needs and the one they deserve.
Aw,
That's beautiful. Yeah.
so nice.
So after someone's died, you said there's 5 stages of training. What are some of these other stages or sections in your training that you had to undergo to prepare to be a doula? And once you've done all the training, do you cover all these fields, or do you specialize and say, I'm the end of life doula, I'm the death doula, I'm the after death doula? How does this work?
I will haunt you.
Well, we're laughing about the after death doula, but that is
dear.
the thing. So the next part, so death midwifery, or midwifery, or I don't even know. Death midwifery.
So you could get a good whiff, but usually it's not something you want a midwiff of.
Yes. Okay. So now you have to keep it in because of the joke. But so dead midwifery is when you do home funerals. That's helping people to get dry ice to show them how to set it and how to set the body on it so that the body is able to be preserved. You help them wash the body, you help them turn the body, you help them clothe the body. And this is an instructional role. It's not me personally doing the washing, it's the family, but I'm teaching them sort of how to do it and walking them through. And a lot of it is just providing positive reinforcement, like, yes, you are doing this right. And people instinctively know how to care for their own dead. We've separated it out, but just being there and saying, yes, that's right, you're doing it right. Here is how we can move the body. Here is how, like, we'll put pillows here and this here, so that you don't end up with any fluids leaking or anything like that you don't want to happen during the memorial. So just helping them get all that together, helping them set up the memorial.
How soon does the memorial have to happen? I mean, I don't even know.
There's not any laws or anything about this, is there?
Yeah,
No,
there aren't. Interestingly
practicalities.
enough,
Well, you can only keep a dead body in your house in California for up to, I believe, 2 weeks without some kind of special
Illinois.
dispensation. But
Wow, that's a
forever,
lot.
but other states, I don't know. Well, traditionally, that has been my experience. Is they want things taken care of from the funeral industry, such as it is. If you are not going for a home burial.
Even if you are going for a home burial, in Illinois at least, and there are other places that require this, you are still required to have a funeral director's help. They need to get all the permits and certificates, and they need to oversee the process.
You know, there's a lot of work that goes into dying and funeral preparation and everything. It's something a lot of people don't realize until they experience it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, one of the things that I didn't start learning until I began working in palliative care is that it's pretty expensive not to exist.
Sure is.
To own a copy of a death certificate, which you need, because otherwise, how else will you prove to people that you're dead? Which sounds very counterintuitive, but families do need death certificates to get special flight dispensation, to get other things accomplished. So you do need these. And each of those certificates is about $100 a copy. And you need more than one. This is not like a social security card. It's not something you can put on your phone as an app and, tap into the funeral home, tap into the caterer, whatever. You need physical copies of these death certificates, and they are not cheap.
And I actually had a little bit of first-hand knowledge with this, not here in the United States, but over in India. My mother-in-law, actually, or grandmother-in-law, I should say, passed away. And it was a really scary thing to have to sit and, go through that, not knowing what I needed or what I didn't need. It was a scary experience.
So having somebody like Jasmin to maybe serve as, I believe her words were grief butler, would be very helpful to you in that sort of setting.
I wanted to mention one thing in here that we maybe don't think about as much, in that when, Jasmin, I think you can speak to this a little bit, but when we have to mourn over a loved one or something like that, we're quite vulnerable, aren't we, in terms of what we what we can be offered by various people, say a mortician or someone at the hospital who's talking about very particular services. We're a little bit at the mercy of whoever wants to sell us something. And this isn't to say that, they're up to no good or anything like that. It's just a matter of fact that if we don't watch out,
Definitely.
We can get taken advantage of, because we're not really in a very good state of mind to make those decisions.
It's definitely true that there are a lot of wonderful, wonderful people in the funeral industry who really just want to take care of you. But you're also in a very, very vulnerable state of mind. So one of my primary jobs is to be an advocate for the family, and to be there and to talk to them about what their budget is and what they want, and to help them stay on that, to not let them feel guilty for not being able to pay for a more expensive casket, that not feeling like that's not good enough, or that they have to get their loved one embalmed, or that the casket has to be sealed as tight as anything possible so that the rain doesn't get in, which causes exploding casket syndrome. Do we know about
Exploding casket syndrome?
You guys want to hear about exploding casket syndrome?
Yes, please.
Now we're getting to the heart of the matter.
You all know the body has a decomposition process that it goes through, whether you like it or not, even if you get embalmed. And so if you have a very tightly sealed casket, the process is still going on, and so there's gas being produced, and it's in a very tightly sealed area now. So over time, there will be some difficulties with the casket, either like in some hinges, or like there's a small crack because a rock shifted or something like that. And then that becomes a weak point, and
Whoa,
it explodes.
underground or above? Underground.
Underground.
Which is actually way cooler, because imagine for a moment, you were standing there. In fact, I almost want this to happen to me, because you're standing there, everybody's all gathered around the grave, and then boom, big explosion of dirt. And people...
Say that's somebody's dad.
No, if it was me, I'm saying I want me.
Oh, you want you to explode.
Specifically, I would love the idea of everybody gathered around and then just the grave explodes, and I get that one last parting prank.
All right, so what you want to do then is we'll talk and that you really want the most hermetically sealed casket, and you also want some, I don't know, like helium balloons in there with you or something like that.
Or eat a few burritos, Josh, before you...
Can you imagine the helium balloons? Brains!
I'm just here to make it happen, so if you really want to explode, let's
Whatever ridiculous things I want my death to be like changes weekly and whatever I find most amusing.
Okay, well, update your advanced directives, okay?
I have to change it from volcano to exploding casket, so I'll get right on that. But, so we talked a little bit early, so, you have these stages where end of life, you are helping people sort of plan and make sense of their life story and ethical wills, which we kind of glossed over. We talked about the death vigil. We talk about the mourning and the preparing somebody. You help them wash the body and put them on ice. Now, when you're putting somebody on ice, is this just regular, ice cubes? Can you go to the freezer and you're stacking them on those? Like, how are you preserving this body, and for how long, and to what end for a home funeral versus a transportation issue?
So you're going to need to use dry ice for it. For smaller bodies, in the case that it is a child, you can use those really nice freezer packs that have, so that it doesn't freeze the body. You don't want that. But we do want to keep it all cool. Dry ice is what you use, and we got to make sure that gets transported safely, because it is very dangerous if you mess with it wrong. What you do is you just wrap it in sheets and put it under sort of the large areas, so under the shoulders, under the torso, under the hips. And what that does is it just keeps the temperature of the body cooler, and so it slows decomposition heavily. It's usually need about 40 pounds of dry ice right at the beginning, and that evaporates, so you need to get like 20 more pounds the next day or something like that. You don't want to do that for too long. You can keep a body preserved for a few days, long enough to get everyone in for the memorial.
Yeah.
Okay. And now, one of the things that we as doctors almost never really do get a chance to see, but people are constantly talking about on, I don't know, crime shows and hospital shows and dramas where people die, is rigor mortis. Very, very well known to the general public, but not very often seen. Is this something that you've been trained in or had exposure to? Or?
Trained in, yes. This is especially important in home funerals because it becomes very, very difficult to dress a body that has gone into rigor mortis, because you can no longer really move the arms or anything to get them in anywhere. So it happens like 2 to 4 hours after the death, and then will stay for about a day. So you really do want to get the body cleaned and dressed and in the position that you want the body to be in for the memorial in that 2 to 4 hour window.
I have to ask, I'm curious, because this is all, and maybe this is like going more into like the physiology, but if this is all from muscle contraction, I almost wonder if like paralytics that we use medically could have a role here to like prevent rigor mortis and to relax the body so that you could work with it.
That's a good thought.
I mean, you don't have circulating blood volume anymore, so it's going to be difficult to get the paralytics
the main thing we have to
into the
remember
muscle
here,
tissue.
Praz, is that the energy that is spent in order for muscles to move, a lot of that energy is spent actually contracting relaxing the muscle. Remember? So if you
Relaxing.
have all of a sudden
Yeah.
you have an energy deficit, then regardless of what you do in terms of paralytics, which usually I would say pretty commonly work on the nerves, right? So the nerve impulses that go down. So
Yeah.
it would be rather useless on muscles which are actually contracted up because there's no energy available for turning over the little machinery which allows muscles to relax.
We've all heard the term dead weight, and it may be a surprise to many people to find that when you have set into rigor mortis, or when somebody is not among the living, they are very heavy. And I'm not necessarily talking about obese people or muscular people. I'm simply saying you can have even the tiniest little, 80-pound elderly person, and once they are truly deceased, to use the Mel Brooks term, not quite dead and truly dead, they are very, very heavy. And you mentioned, Jasmin, that you actually are more involved with the direction and the helping of family members. Have you ever had to try and lift a dead body?
I have not personally, but I can tell you.
Is this
how.
something they warned you? Yeah, is this something they warned you about, that people do become very heavy post-death?
They did. Laura Seba, who taught my class, would not have let me go out into the world without knowing how to lift a body. The best way to do it in the home funeral is you sort of make a stretcher sort of your own. If you roll the sheet that they're lying on very, very close to the body, it makes sort of a handhold, and you need about 6 people to lift a body. And so they roll the sheet up very close to the body, and then everyone lifts at the same time, and you all sort of walk that way. Yeah, it's surprisingly heavy.
We mentioned briefly, and I know we sort of joked a little bit about it, but you said there's after-death doulas too, in addition to the home funerals and helping with the mourning and taking care of certain services or contacting things for the family. What else might an after-death doula do?
So that separates into sort of 2 sections. There's the mourning doulas, which will help with the funeral arrangements, the memorial arrangements, either doing things like taking clothes to the funeral home or being the point person, the contact person, so that the family has a little more space to grieve and they don't also have to arrange everything, to helping just clean or do some little things just to give space to people who are grieving. And then there is also help with artifact organization, which is sort of, my mother has passed and now I have a house full of things and I don't know what to do. And, I don't know what to do, and everything here belongs to my mother, and I cannot throw away things that have her handwriting on it, and the grief involved with having to get rid of material possessions. So helping people navigate that and end up with a collection that is small and manageable but meaningful, that they can take with them and help remove the rest, whether it's through estate sales or through donations or charity or Free Cycle, which is a program that I learned about where you can just give people things, and the nice thing is that those people often need those things, so you can feel like your loved ones' artifacts are going to a good purpose.
Do you have to be involved with legal services or a lawyer in order to...
So I myself wouldn't retain a lawyer, but I would advise someone to retain a lawyer. They would probably want to get a lawyer involved. It's good to have lawyers. Lawyers are useful.
And we talked about sort of the 5 different kinds of doula or death doula duties. Wow, that's a tongue twister. But let me ask, in terms of this training, I know one of the big controversies once I started researching death doulas is that there's no formally recognized national training body. So what sort of things are you trained in? Have you met any other death doulas who have been trained differently? Do you choose a focus once you are doulaing? How does that work?
So, yeah, definitely there's no formal recognized national standard. I know because I was also doing research and looking, and I couldn't find anything. So I found a lot of different programs. They can be anything from weekend intensives that are like 22-hour classes to multi-month programs. When I was doing my initial research on it, I just looked for what seemed to be the most rigorous client-centered course.
Sorry, I heard rigor.
The most rigor mortis.
There you go. Get it all out.
And so I ended up with a program called Momdoulery, which was initially. I know,
That's
I
awesome.
laughed too. I thought
fantastic.
this is a crazy name, but it was the best program that I could find, and it is taught by Laura Seba, who is a birth and death doula in New York.
What made it the best program you could find?
So it was a 16-week program that I took, which appealed to me because I thought, I can't possibly learn everything that I want to learn in 22 hours. Not that I tried. Maybe I'm sure that their programs are excellent, but I wanted to sort of shove as much knowledge as I could into my head, and I thought longer programs probably better. And there was a phenomenal amount of paperwork talking about the standards of the program that they were hoping would be upheld, the importance of the relationship with the client. We talked a lot about legal questions and how to write contracts for ourselves, and so it was really well put together.
Good. Did you have any practical part of your training as well? You know how doctors, when we go through our medical school, we actually have to get in the field, we do our residencies. Did you also have any of that?
Yeah, like an apprenticeship.
We were assigned to, we went out to talk to funeral homeowners as part of it. We went out and did some end-of-life consulting, which is meeting with people for about 3 hours and going over all the paperwork and talking about the end-of-life process. So we did go out and do some practical work.
Was that under the mentorship of a certified death doula?
It was not. I was alone.
Oh my gosh.
So in Chicago that I know of, there are 3 sort of professional. One of them is me. And there is one.
Someone's got to
there's
be the
one
first
woman-
one, man.
Right. So there are 2 others that I could find, and both of them were home funeral guides. So there are no other death doulas per se in this area, which is a difficulty because sort of trying to break into the funeral industry is scary. It's very scary to be part of a new profession and to try to get people to take you seriously.
Wow.
It's also difficult because since I'm on call for death vigils, what happens if something happens? What happens if I'm dying during that time, Who covers for me? Because there isn't really anyone. And so finding hospice volunteers is really important, people who are also either hospice nurses or previous hospice nurses, people who are able to be in that situation as backup. Although I'm hoping that I inspire some people in the area to become death doulas so that we can cover each other.
Yeah. And so, Jasmin, if you're kind of solo and, the field is kind of, it sounds like it's growing at this time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Definitely.
maturing field. So how do they find you?
They find me on the internet, where you find all things.
All right.
Alternately, so I'm running a book club
Okay.
about death and mortality. Also, so word of mouth, again, is very important. If you take good care of people, they'll remember when their friends start talking.
When their friends start dying, they'll remember you.
Harsh but true.
Yeah.
They'll remember and say, she took really good care of my mom. I think she could help you also. So that's really important. Working with funeral homes and hospices to see if they have any clients that they think would benefit from that kind of care. Flyers, the good old-fashioned way, posting things.
Sure.
And then seeing maybe if the public library wants an end-of-life concerns lecture or something like that. But mostly it's who you know. And I found a lot of people are coming to me with questions once I've put it out there that I'm able to talk about this and qualified to answer some questions.
Oh, what's on your book club list? Are there any good books you recommend for people who are interested in this?
So many things are on my book club list. Let's see. I was just reading Caitlin Dowdy's book.
Smoke Gets in Your Eyes.
Other Lessons from the Crematory. So I just finished that today, and it was wonderful.
I'm looking for a good before bedtime book. Is that
Before Bedtime. When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi, who was a brain surgeon. Who got cancer, and so his story, it was wonderful book. We read some things by Atul Gawande. We just read Elizabeth Alexander's The Light of the World, is a memoir about the death of her husband. So we really run the entire way. We're doing death perspective, we're doing some satire, we're doing funeral industry exposés.
I'd like to add in, as a recommendation on my end, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche, which is he added to the existing Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is not the Necronomicon. It is sort of the funeral process book based around helping, almost a guide for Tibetan death doulas, I guess, would be talking with you how I would describe it. And it was a very interesting thing describing. So let me ask, before we go any further, how did you first become interested in this field or aware of it?
What a long story.
It's okay, we've got time.
Listen. So my mother told me that when I was 5 years old, I came up to her and said, "I know what death is," and then turned around and left.
This is like a superhero origin story.
Right? My mother wrote about it in her journal. Like, what have I given birth to? What is this?
This is the little boy.
Well, maybe her mother was reading her the Tibetan Book of Death before bedtime. Who knows?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, who knows? Who knows? It could have been. But it sort of has always been in the back of my mind. I've thought a lot about mortality, my own, other things. I was looking at the possibility of going into the medical field myself for a while, probably as a hospice nurse, and then I don't have any money, so I couldn't really go to nursing school. Maybe like elder care companions or something like that, and ended up reading an article that also talked about death doulas, and I was like, what is that? I'm very excited. So I did some research and found it, and it was great. I'm also part of the Dance Macabre at the Bristol Renaissance Fair, so death has been a part of my life for quite some time.
Wow.
Let me ask this, in terms of one of the things that I think would probably make it harder to attract people to the field is that I think a lot of people have the perception that being around death so much can be very overwhelming to a lot of people. And I'm sure that's the case for anybody. How would you say you've, I guess for lack of a better word, normalized other people's deaths into your life and into your career?
I wouldn't say... Well, I guess normalize is right. Humans can normalize pretty much anything. But it's important not to be detached, because the being present and really being involved with this process is part of what's so important about this field. So there's a lot of self-care involved. You need to make space for yourself. You need to make sure that, as much as you're making sure that the family members are eating and drinking and taking care of themselves, you need to make sure that you are eating and drinking and taking care of yourself, and that you have other death professionals to talk to. Apart from that, it's really not all that morbid. It's a lot about life. You end up talking a lot about life, how people have lived their lives, their history, the connections that people make, the loves that they have in their lives, and you listen to people talking about how they love the sunrise and that it seems really special, and you think, I see that thing every day. I don't see it every day. I don't wake up at any time to see the sunrise. If I did.
But presumably there are people out there who see this every day and they like it.
And you start thinking of that as beautiful. You start thinking about bees or bushes or the way that water goes or the way that your cat smells, even if it's terrible. And it is. As being part of life and being celebrated because of that. So it's been a gift. Far from thinking too much about death and the end, it has made me much more appreciative of everything that life has.
But do you need any downtime after, let's say, a client or two? Because I find myself, after a couple of shifts, I need a few days, just to readjust, just because, sometimes it gets intense.
Definitely. Definitely you gotta get that self-care in there. You can't pour out an empty glass. So it's kind of a freelancing position, I guess. So if I'm not able to take clients, I just don't take clients. Or I make sure that I only have one death vigil client a month, something like that, just to make sure that I'm taking care of myself in advance.
Sure.
And that's, obviously burnout certainly would be a concern if you're watching one person die a month for an indefinite amount of time. What is your preferred method of, getting in some treat yourself time?
Getting in some treat yourself time? Really, really simple things. I dance. Dancing is good. Getting involved in muscles, so like swimming or running or any of that sort of gets you back in your body instead of in your brain. Spending time with like small children and animals is really good. They're very uncomplicated.
They're both very uplifting. I can vouch for that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Things that are uncomplicated are good.
Yeah.
And I know we've kind of very much danced around this whole issue. It sounds like you are providing a very, very in-depth and intense level of service. What does this cost a client? What are you paid for these work? Are you paid for this work? What does this cost?
It is paid. A lot of us do pro bono work as well. My specific set of people that I want to do pro bono work for is people who are in hospice programs who do not have family, either because their family is in another country or because they are the last of their family. So being there for people who just don't have anyone. As far as the rest, it's been really difficult to think about price because it's not necessarily work that I want to charge for. I want to be there for people, but until we have a revolution and overthrow capitalism, I have to eat.
Yeah. Eating's a big deal.
Eating's a big deal.
Yeah.
I like to have a house or somewhere I can not be rained on. Those things are important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, eating.
Yeah.
So it's hard. If you wanted an entire, from end of life planning all the way through home funeral and mourning, probably somewhere around 1,500.
Wow.
I
Okay.
think in there.
And this is something that really the world of insurance and things haven't really caught up with.
Yeah, so there are some
Yeah.
insurance places that will pay you for birth doulas, I know, and I'm not sure whether or not you can claim death doula services, but you should always try.
Right.
The ultimate pre-existing condition.
Mortality, right?
Yeah.
I can't take
far.
you. Someday you'll die.
Yeah.
So we have spent a lot of time talking about death on the show. I have to tell you, this is the most fun that I've had doing it in quite some time. So let's bring some travel back into this and talk a little bit about funeral traditions around the world, because there's some fun ones which you may or may not be aware of, and I'd like to get your take as somebody who is, deeply invested in the world of mortality.
My first question to you is going to be, if we're going to talk about death in America, what rating does this podcast have? Am I allowed to swear?
Oh,
You can
yeah.
swear as much.
We don't have any funding or anybody who's going to be
That's great.
It is allowed and encouraged to swear.
I think our disconnection from death in this country is fucking disgraceful.
Yeah. All right.
Very, very harsh. All right, very harsh. But
No,
That is not an
I think
overstatement. I will agree with that.
There's
Right.
yeah, there we go. And that was very cathartic. Bodies sort of get hurried from place to place. A lot of places cover them up to make sure that people aren't seeing them. We try so hard to cover up death, to brush it under the carpet, to make it look beautiful with embalming and makeup and put a nice face on it, and then you get 10 minutes or an hour or something to look at your loved one, and then you have to deal with all of these people coming in for the funeral, and then they go away, and then they go in the ground, and it's so harmful to the grief process. It's so death avoidant, and we have to stop all of that business.
Well, have you noticed a difference in if there's a cultural influence? I'm talking about, I don't know if people from different cultures have different preferences here with your work, even parts of the country, the Midwest versus, New York, where you trained, or, out west.
But have you noticed any cultural differences?
I have been talking with the good people over at Chicago Jewish Funerals, and so I took a class with their director, David Jacobson, about Jewish burials and the funeral traditions there, which are much different and actually are very close to green burial that we're sort of seeing a trend going towards, making sure that everything is able to decompose and break down and go into the earth, and not using any metal in the caskets and everything. So the Jewish people have been doing green burial for a very, very long time, and we're just sort of getting around back to it, which I find really interesting.
No. It's time and time again what happens, especially with the extremes of life, so birth and death. We tend to climb this ladder of technology to a certain point where we're like, oh, we're conquering this, we're getting better than this, we're overcoming this, and we climb and climb and climb, and then we, genuinely, I think, as a society, we have a moment of clarity where we say, oh, we're not as good as we thought we were. And I think it's fair to say that we all have to contend with that progression. So we every single time, we sort of climb out of this attitude of death. We medical world, we have to prevent death no matter what. You've got to stop that person from dying, and then we got to slowly climb back and say, no, it's not so bad, take it easy, back it up.
Definitely. Having death be viewed as failure must be absolutely crushing.
It's horrifying. It's absolutely and we're lucky, I think, our generation, Ward, Praz, Josh, myself, we were not confronted with that. We were very much living in a world where our contemporaries were taking care of us. They said, no, you don't have to think about death that way.
That's wonderful to hear.
You don't think so?
Oh, uh-oh.
I definitely did not have that experience.
Really?
In fact, part of the whole reason I got into palliative care is I was one of the only members of my residency class who was comfortable having these discussions and who was willing to recognize that, guys, every single person in this hospital is going to die, and there is not a damn thing we can do about it. Now, obviously, it's all happening on different timelines, but, I think my experience has been you find one or two mentors who impress you with the fact that they can sit down and have these difficult conversations and show that people overall, I found that the people I went in and I talked to who decided to make themselves do not resuscitate, who decided to make themselves hospice, overall always seemed to me like they were happier and more comfortable and generally more at peace than my patients who would be fighting, kicking, and screaming, to have life pried out of their cold, dead hands. So
Right.
I would say it was really seeing the difference that swung me more than being told you can't ever fail. We're still told that even today, and the only reason I've sort of gotten away from that is I have built myself a lot more into the palliative world where we look at making sure the highest quality of life and death is achieved rather than just staving death off.
I will say that our disconnect. I agree with Jasmine that our culture still has a problem with a disconnect with death, and a lot of patients, family members, and doctors and nurses sometimes are in denial about the fact that death is a part of life. And when we are in denial about that, our actions, our treatment plans, are just the way we treat our patients and ourselves don't quite match up with what is actually going on. And that's part of what that stress comes from.
Well, here's the other side of that too. Like when we talk about death as failure, like when outcomes are judged, like a lot of it is judged based on morbidity or mortality scores, and the higher those scores are, the worse, quote unquote, or the higher percentage of morbidity and mortality, like equates to higher failure of care or substandard of care. So it's not just our mental disconnect, but we often feel pressure to keep people alive so that our own metrics are met.
Right, surgeons and cardiologists are judged based on their complication rates and how many of their patients die, and this may or may not be, the best metric in the grand scheme of things.
Sure, and
It
you
sounds
guys
sort
are
of
talking
like
about
spiral.
in terms of your even your insurance payout, your ability to, draw a salary, that kind of a thing.
Right.
Yeah. So let's veer back into, as I said, a little bit different. So I want to take you guys through a couple different funeral traditions and places we've traveled, and then I'd like to get a travel story from you, Jasmin. So here's a few places I want to tell you where death is handled very different from the U.S. Mongolia, heavy Buddhist influence. They just leave people out effectively for the wolves, but really more for the vultures. Birds, Papua New Guinea, where we will be traveling this coming September, has 84 different tribes and about 86 different burial customs. Some of them include, and are not limited to, mummifying the corpses of ancestors and displaying them in the center of the village to guard the village and hone the memory. So every day you walk out, you're not only reminded that you will die, but that you will be watching over the village after you go, and people will be around with you. There is rumors, I believe it has by and large been stamped out, but there is a degree of cannibalism where there would be the consumption of loved ones to take them into yourself. This is very tribe dependent and has never been witnessed, only written about, or never been witnessed in modern day, only written about in some of the early exploration of the area. Of course, we know Mexico with their Day of the Dead is a much cheerier version, but my all-time favorite, I would have to say, is Madagascar, where I think you'll relate to this, Jasmin, as somebody who enjoys the dance macabre. Madagascar has a ritual known as Famadihana, and it is a ritual yearly exhumation of the corpses of ancestors. It's known as the turning of the bones, and they take them out, and once a year, once every couple years, ancestors are dug up, they are rewrapped and dressed in fresh cloth, and the family members dance with them around a tomb to live music. And it's done to honor and spend time with dead loved ones, and the rest of the time they just don't talk about it at all. So once a year you bring everybody up, you spend time with them. It's like, oh, grandma's coming to visit. Hasn't grandma been dead for 12 years? Well, why should that stop her?
I love it.
And I thought that was I tried to picture what that would look like in the U.S., and that ended up in the zombie apocalypse scenarios.
May there be much dancing in the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, so I would love to see a turning of the bones and dancing with, and of course I've talked a couple times in the past about how my family members have, a couple of my family members have on the process of dying stayed in the filing cabinet in the garage, which we refer to as the Dvoretsky family mausoleum, en route to their final destination. And that's, I'm sure, where I will end up for at least a while, too, filed under D for Dead Doc Dvoretsky.
Nice.
Triple D.
But as I've said, this has been the most fun I have had talking about death in some time. But one of the things we love to cover in each of our episodes is we like to get what we call a just the tip, a little bit of a travel story to break away. We've talked about some heavy stuff this time, so it could be related to your work and studies, or it could just be a great time that you've had abroad. Where is a place that you would recommend any of our listeners travel to and see and should absolutely visit, do, or participate in before they die? And if you have a story with your experience, even better.
Wow, can I have 2 places?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. I think everyone before they die should go to see Kiyomizu-dera in Kyoto. Pure water temple, and it is the most beautiful place I have ever. It's my favorite place on earth. You can look out, especially at night. I like it at night. Go at night, and you look out, and there's this valley full of trees, and it's so dark, and then there are little spots of light where there are little temples in the forest, and it is just gorgeous. As far as fun, I would highly recommend going to Schöne Plata in Switzerland. It's a very tall, flat place where you go up to it with a funicular, which is the little going up the mountain thing, and you can walk around it. And you can also be tricked by your father into taking a 6-hour hike to here. So we thought we were going around, and my dad said, let's go this way, and we followed him because we're fools. And instead of going around the top of the plateau, and mind you, I am like 11 or something at this point, and my sister is there as well, and she's 4 years younger than I am. So we had to put a stick of Toblerone chocolate out, like carrot and stick it, so that she would walk. And it was a beautiful walk. It was wonderful. It was like being in the wild places of the earth, that there are still places where you can go and see only mountains and no people. And it was a beautiful walk, but it was 6 hours.
Oh, God.
Look out for that. Take some chocolate. Yeah.
It's good.
Is that the moment when you came back in and said, Mom, I definitely know what death is?
Yeah, right.
Now I know.
Definitely know. Now I know.
That wraps up this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Jasmin, and for teaching us about this amazing field. For any of our listeners out there who are interested in getting a hold of you, what is the best way to reach you? Do you have a Facebook, a Twitter, an email that you would prefer to be contacted by if they have questions, concerns, or want to engage your services?
I'm working on it. Eventually, you'll be able to find me. I haven't thought of a business name yet, so it's just Jasmin Tomlins right now. But you can email me at j.m.tomlins@gmail.com, or you can find me on Twitter, where I am sending out lovely death articles all the time and fun things that you can do with your cremains and other thoughts. I was very happy about this. I'm at Rose of Karen, like the ferryman.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Definitely let all of our listeners know, no matter how old you are, please go out there, take care of any end-of-life care that you can possibly think of.
Absolutely.
You know, it's
this is not just for old people or sick people, or to do it.
Yeah,
do it now.
It's genuinely and honestly, and I know it sounds morbid or weird or whatever it is, but it is never too early to think about this stuff. And I know that's
I have a living will.
And think about what a gift it is if something terrible and unthinkable were to happen, and something happened and you died and you're young, and how much grief that would give your family and your friends, and how much grief you could save them by having been prepared and let them take care of you the way that you want to be taken care of.
So that wraps up this episode. As always, we would love for you to support us spiritually, emotionally, and financially. You can do that by leaving us comments and questions on our Facebook page at Travel Medicine Podcast, on our Twitter, on our Squarespace. All of the links are in the show notes. We would love if you could donate on any amount on Patreon. It helps us get better sound equipment, better editing, better lessons for me so I can fix the sound and editing problems, and a whole bunch of other issues that come up. This show is produced by me with a lot of help from all the folks you've heard here today, as well as many more. And until next time, as always, happy travels.
Happy travels.
Bye,
Yay.
everybody.
Happy travels, everybody.
Travels.